It is Wednesday, May 24th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. The 2023 rankings have been live on DraftSharks.com now for a while. We've already made multiple updates to them for free agency, for the NFL draft. You can check them out there. You can apply them to your league so you can see how the projections fit into your specific format. Last week, Jared, we talked through some hard to project backfields. So, folks, if you like that show, or if you haven't listened to it yet, if you listen to it and then like it, give us a rating, give us a review. We appreciate that wherever you do your podcast listening. The next 2 weeks here, starting today, we're going to talk about tough to predict pass offenses, focusing on wide receivers, tight ends, especially the target distribution among those positions. Because, Jared, we have to put out numbers for all of them, but ultimately they're all educated guesses, and some situations leave us guessing more than others.
Yeah, I think it's important to know what we don't know, right? You said it about targets. You can't score a receiving fantasy point without getting a target. So figuring out how many passes these teams are going to throw, and then most importantly, where the targets are going to go is if you can do that semi-accurately, you're way ahead of the game as far as projecting these wide receivers and drafting the best values at wide receiver and tight end.
Yeah, and of course, like I said, we do come up with projections for all of them, but we also come up with ceiling and floor projections because we know that these aren't going to just be the numbers for the season for everybody. We're looking at what we think a guy will at least do, what we think the downside risk is, and what we think he could do if he reaches that ultimate ceiling. And that's important because, to be honest, most of the players we're drafting saying this is what could happen. And if this does happen, I want to make sure to get some of this guy. Other guys might just be like, this is what I expect. They're not going to sway your team one way or the other. But, the season really could come down to just getting that one or two guys who way exceed what we expect. And that's the ceiling side.
Yeah. And these guys we're going to talk about today, because they're on teams that are tough to project, are going to have the widest ranges of outcomes, right? If you go to your draft forum, you're going to see these guys with, probably lower ceilings, but higher floors. Those are uncomfortable players to draft sometimes. But I think those are the players you want to be drafting in the middle and later rounds of your draft, because again, like you said, they have those higher ceilings, and that's what we ultimately care about.
And of course, a lot of times it just comes down to value, where a guy is going. We're going to talk about some guys on the show where the only thing they did wrong was let you down last year, and maybe that shouldn't factor in this year. But we're all about value. That's the primary, that's the first thing. If you look at the Draft Sharks, the main tenets of our approach, value is the top thing. Value in any format, value in your drafts, value throughout the season. That's the basis for it. And, like I said, we're going to get to some specific players where it factors in even more. But let's get to the teams right now instead of just dancing around it. We'll start with the Baltimore Ravens, which of course got a lot more interesting on the passing front, first with extending Lamar Jackson after the extended dance between those two. 2018 was the last time the Ravens did not rank in the bottom half of the league in wide receiver target share. That team had Michael Crabtree, John Brown, and Willie Snead, all between 90 and 100 targets. And Jared, Willie Snead, if he had been on last year's Ravens, he might have been the best wideout over the full season, because Demarcus Robinson led that team in wide receiver targets at 75. Devin Duvernay was second at 49 targets. Of course, Rashad Bateman missed nearly all the season with a foot injury. He's back. He was on field for OTAs, so he should be good to go. And obviously, everybody watching knows they also signed Odell Beckham for big money. They also drafted Zay Flowers in round 1. So how have you gone about projecting the targets for this group?
Yeah, totally remade wide receiver core and a new offensive coordinator here in Todd Monken. I think, to me, that's the first question with the Ravens is how much are they going to pass? I think we're all assuming they're going to pass more after, replacing Greg Roman, who's always been run heavy, with Todd Monken. So the Ravens pass rates the last 4 years under Greg Roman, 44%, 44.1%, 56.4%, and 50% for a 48.6% average. Todd Monken's pass rates in his 4 seasons as an NFL offensive coordinator, 57.5%, 62.3, 63.1, 59.6 for a 60.6% average. Just a massive shift there in like philosophy. I don't think, and we don't have the Ravens currently projected to throw anywhere near, 60.5% of the time. I don't think building an offense around Lamar Jackson that's that pass heavy is the way to go. But the Ravens are definitely going to pass more than they did under Greg Roman. So that's obviously good news for all these wide receivers. Now figuring out exactly how the targets are going to be dispersed between these top three guys is definitely a challenge. And I think something we'll have a better answer as we get into the summer.
And I think when we get to ADPs for this group, we're going to see that the uncertainty about how much this team's going to pass is kind of depressing all of the wide receiver ADPs here. And it's making it so you just take a shot on somebody rather than having to plant a flag necessarily. I agree. The switch in OC, the re-signing the quarterback, the drafting the wide receiver, the signing Odell Beckham, it all points to a lot more passing. And anybody who says they know how much Baltimore is going to pass this year is lying, because we don't know. They made a lot of changes. They clearly want to do something different. And it can also be a little skewed even when we get into the season, because a lot of plays that start out as passes turn into Lamar Jackson runs. So even when it looks like a running play on the stat sheet, it started out as a drop back with at least the opportunity to throw a pass to somebody. So it's going to be a very interesting offense. Let's get to those ADPs, because I think, like I said, that helps to kind of sort things out here. We're guessing about how many targets go to Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham, who have not been on the team before. We're guessing to a degree with Rashad Bateman, who has not been through a full season since Marquise Brown left the team. All of these guys are going outside the top 40 in underdog drafts. Zay Flowers is first at wide receiver 44, middle round 8. Rashad Bateman, wide receiver 46 at the 8-9 turn. Odell Beckham, wide receiver 51, early in round 10. Jared, to me, it's a range where it's a good time to pick up a 5th or 6th wide receiver. I think all these guys are interesting. None of them stands out as I got to have this guy. And generally, I've just been saying, if any of the 3 falls well past ADP in a best ball tournament, I'll go ahead and take him there.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I'm with ADP and Beckham being the one I'm least interested in. He hasn't been great since 2018. Look at his last 3 fantasy finishes. 2019, 35th among wide receivers in PPR points per game. 2020, 39th. 2021, 64th. Obviously missed all of last year after the torn ACL in the Super Bowl. Turns 31 in November. The only positive thing I can point to with Beckham is that the Ravens gave him $15 million for this 1-year deal, including $14 million guaranteed. That, to me, was shocking that he got that much money. And it tells me he's obviously, the Ravens want him to have a big role. But I just don't see any reason to get super excited about Beckham beyond like the name value.
Yeah, I was more interested in the ceiling on him before they drafted Zay Flowers. And, that might prove to be an overreaction on my part going forward, depending on how quickly Flowers develops and even how quickly they want him to develop. Maybe they took him in round 1 because they love him long-term, but they're expecting to bring him along slowly. We'll see about that as we get into the summer. But I think all the guys are at best fairly priced. I'm not chasing after any of the 3. Frankly, the guy in a Baltimore uniform that I'm most interested in at this point is Mark Andrews. He's the one guy I feel great about. He has led tight ends in target share each of the past 2 years. He's the only tight end that has hit 25+% target share each of the past 3 years. I think he's still the easy favorite to lead this team in targets. And even if that target share probably comes down because the wide receivers are better now, if the passing volume comes up, if the offensive efficiency comes up, those 2 things can easily make up for that volume. And to me, Mark Andrews is the best bet among tight ends to challenge Travis Kelce for the top spot this year.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I've been drafting a lot of Mark Andrews in round 3. I like that price tag. He's been elite since he entered the league. Mark Andrews has finished top 6 among tight ends in yards per route run in all 5 of his NFL seasons. That includes a 3rd place finish last year. I just don't think he's going to lose a ton of target share to these wide receivers. It probably comes down a bit from, he was at 26.8% last year. That's a massive number. He was at 25% the year prior. I think it's going to remain in that 23 to 25% range, which is a big number for a tight end. And like you said, with the increased passing volume, I think he's going to be a volume monster again. So I'm with you. He's easily the most attractive of these Ravens pass catchers, even considering ADP for me.
He's going late round 3 on both. He is the second tight end in ADP, but he's more than 2 rounds behind Travis Kelce and not quite a round and a half ahead of TJ Hawkinson. I certainly think Hawkinson could outscore Mark Andrews, but Andrews has been the much better player and much better fantasy producer thus far in both of their careers. So I'm definitely betting on Andrews clearly ahead of Hawkinson. And to me, he's the, there's obviously Travis Kelce's in his own class. Behind him, Mark Andrews is the one where I'm like, I don't want to miss out in case there's something big ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's Kelce gap to Andrews, but then there's a gap between Andrews and the next group of tight ends.
Mm-hmm. I think it helps too that if you look around Andrews at other positions, the wide receivers that are around him in ADP, we've got DK Metcalf right in front of him. Behind him, Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper. I want Mark Andrews over all 3 of those guys in general. Round 4, we've got Christian Watson, Mike Williams, DeAndre Hopkins, Jerry Jeudy. So with Mark Andrews going late in round 3, both on Underdog and on Drafters, I can take him over one of those receivers I just named. And then in round 4, I can still have a pick among those other guys that I don't think are all that different from Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper.
Yeah, then you can draft your Lamar Jackson in round 4 or 5 or whatever, and not have to mess with this wide receiver group.
Maybe a better chance of Lamar Jackson being there once we get to redraft time. He has gotten into that 3-4 turn area in Underdog. It was glorious early on when you could get Mark Andrews in round 4 and Lamar Jackson in round 5. I was enjoying that.
Me too.
Let's move on now to the Buffalo Bills. And what's not tricky about this one, Jared, is Stephon Diggs. He's the guy. He's an easy first rounder in fantasy. He's a strong target collector. He's been over 100 catches and 1,200 yards in each of his 3 Bills seasons, consistently among the leaders in end zone targets. So where does this group get tricky?
It gets tricky beyond Stephon Diggs, and really for as pass happy and really as productive as this Bills passing game has been the last 3 years, there hasn't been like a really good fantasy option beyond Stephon Diggs. Here's like the Bills' top pass catchers outside of Diggs each of the last 3 years. 2020, and this is all PPR. 2020, you had Cole Beasley finishing wide receiver 27. So, okay, he was like a fine wide receiver 3. Dawson Knox was the lead tight end that year and finished tight end 36. 2021, Cole Beasley, second best fantasy wide receiver, finished wide receiver 40. Dawson Knox was tight end 11. And last year, Gabe Davis was the second most productive fantasy wide receiver, finished wide receiver 35 in PPR points. Dawson Knox was tight end 13. So, like, yeah, this is an offense we want to invest in, but don't get too excited about the pass catchers beyond Steph Diggs.
And I don't think the people are too excited about Gabe Davis, especially. So I think if you were on Gabe Davis last year, you should be on him right now. The only change between where he was then and where he is now is that he let you down in 2022. And Jared, the number that you just said for where he finished in PPR, that's even ahead of where he's going in Underdog ADP right now. I know Underdog's half PPR. I don't have the half PPR finish in front of me, but it was around the same for Gabe Davis, I'm sure. And last year, you were drafting him from like wide receiver 23 to 26. We hated him at that level last year. It was not a good time to target him. Now he's wide receiver 40 on Underdog. Not a must at that level, as you just alluded to. They might not have another guy that you need to have, but there's certainly upside from that spot, especially because Josh Allen in April was like, hey, we want to get Gabe Davis more catch and run opportunities. I don't want to just throw deep to him and then hope he catches it.
Yeah, it was wide receiver 34 in non-PPR points or half PPR points per game for Davis. And I do, he does to me have more value on Underdog than he does on full PPR sites. But the thing about Davis last season, he went for 88 yards and a touchdown in that season opener against the Rams, suffered a high ankle sprain in practice leading into week 2. We talk about all the time, high ankle sprains are killers. Like they knock guys out for 4 to 6, 7 weeks, but they tend to limit effectiveness even beyond that. So the fact that Gabe Davis still finished wide receiver 35 in PPR points per game last year, 17.4% target share, like that's not awesome, but that's like if he can do that again this year, I think he can beat his price tag again. And I think there's still a chance he beats that target share, considering again he did have the high ankle sprain last year. The Bills did lose 117 targets from last year or out the door with Isaiah McKenzie and Devin Singletary departing. I think Davis could pick up some of those. So yeah, I'm definitely in on Gabe Davis at his current cost.
And that's the thing. I said the only thing that changed versus last year. I know that some people are like, Matt, they also drafted Dalton Kincaid. That's a change. Yeah, but like you just said, they also let some players go. And I'm not saying Isaiah McKenzie and Dalton Kincaid are the same talent level, but just in terms of what's available for each guy to get. Dalton Kincaid is the next guy worth talking about here. And, we talked about him plenty leading up to the NFL draft. I love the player. I think he's going too early right now in best ball drafts, though. Tight end 11, late in round 10 on underdog. I mean, that's fine for mixing into your tight ends if you're waiting to that range to take several guys, especially if you're stacking Dalton Kincaid with Josh Allen. And, if you're playing in this format that has those playoff weeks where Dalton Kincaid could be quiet all year and then have a big week 17 and make your season. So that's fine. I'm not saying be totally out on Dalton Kincaid, but I'm not sure that his full season ceiling reaches well beyond that tight end 11 ADP. So he's also not a must grab player for me, especially when you look at some other, I would say, comparable players and comparable situations. He's 31 picks ahead of Greg Dulcich in ADP. I don't know how different those two are in floor and ceiling. He's almost 4 rounds ahead of Sam Laporta. I mean, I know one gets Jared Goff and one gets Josh Allen, but Sam Laporta is also entering an offense with Amon-Ra St. Brown and a shrug emoji getting targets, whereas we've got Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis in Buffalo. So, 4 rounds between those guys seems a little imbalanced too.
Yeah, tight end 11 ADP is aggressive for Dalton Kincaid. I thought, and I still think, I was pretty optimistic on his projections, and he lands tight end 16 in our PPR rank. He's not, again, you look at the ceiling projection and it's a bit more exciting, but still tight end 11 in ADP. I looked at the, so Kincaid was the 6th tight end to be picked between pick 20 and 30 in the NFL draft over the last 10 years. The previous 5, here's where they finished in PPR points in their rookie season: 26th, 5th, 25th, 60th, and 14th. So, we're drafting Kincaid to, outscore all but one of those guys. I'm for the most part, we can talk about drafting 100 best ball teams. You want to get some shares of Dalton Kincaid, but for the most part, I'm out on him at tight end 11.
Yeah, even for best ball purposes, I would be underweight on Dalton Kincaid here, but especially as we flip from best ball to, playing out the season, I don't think he belongs among the top 12 tight ends, because when you draft your tight end 11, you're thinking about somebody that you would like to be able to start every week. And I just don't think that's going to be Dalton Kincaid in terms of the number of targets he gets every week. I also think that his arrival is maybe making Dawson Knox underrated at tight end 21 underdog ADP. I mean, he did finish tight end 14, tight end 10 in PPR points per game the past 2 years. Dawson Knox has spent 39.5% of his snaps in the slot for his career, high of 47% last year. So he was increasing his slot role before the Dalton Kincaid pick. I think that we should expect those slot snaps to dissipate with Dalton Kincaid there. They're talking about him as the big slot. I think there is room for both of those guys on the same field in the same alignments. The question is, does Dawson Knox take those slot snaps and have more of them go in line, a traditional tight end spot, or does he lose those snaps to Dalton Kincaid or a better blocker, and he's just not on the field as much? I think when you compare the two of them at where you're drafting them, there's just a lot more downside risk to Dalton Kincaid than there is to Dawson Knox.
Yeah, Knox is the tough one for me. I mean, the Bills just gave him last offseason a pretty nice contract extension. Then they, go and draft Dalton Kincaid in round 1. My thing with Knox, I don't think he's that good, honestly. 12.1% target share last year in his 15 games. That was actually down a bit from 2021. He had a 12.6% target share. Neither of those numbers is exciting. And then you look at last year among 32 tight ends with 40 plus targets, Knox was 26th in yards per route run, 25th in PFF receiving grade in this really strong passing game with Stephon Diggs drawing away attention. So I don't know, maybe the Bills had, second thoughts about the extension they gave him. And we're like, we're going to take a better guy in Kincaid. And we talk all the time too. It's rare for a team to have 2 fantasy viable tight ends. And I do think Kincaid is, the bet to outscore Dawson Knox in fantasy points this season. So yeah, I mean, Knox is going late enough. You can take some shots on it, but he's definitely not a priority target for me.
I agree. He's one of those guys that I keep looking at on the board, and I'm like, Matt, you probably should like him a little bit better here. But especially when you look at some of the guys that are going even past that, it's like, I don't need to take Dawson Knox here. I can just be out on both Bills tight ends and take
Yep.
other guys and be just fine.
Agreed.
We talked about the tight ends. Are you interested at all in Khalil Shakir as potentially the slot wideout?
Yeah, I mean, he'd be my pick for that job with Isaiah McKenzie gone. Shakir's a bigger body receiver, but he did spend about half of his snaps in the slot last year. Again, the Bills signed Deontay Hardy, but Brandon Beane called him a number 4 wide receiver like shortly after they signed him. So I do think Shakir is the favorite for that spot. The other thing here too with the Kincaid addition is how much 12 personnel, how much 2 tight end stuff are the Bills going to run? Because whenever that happens, that's going to mean Shakir is coming off the field. So Shakir is someone you can get with your very last pick in best ball, which I think is fine. I mean, even if you're just hoping for an injury to one of Steph Diggs or Gabe Davis, then I think Shakir definitely becomes interesting. So he's okay to take, but I'm not like expecting a breakout season out of Shakir or Deontay Hardy.
I agree. I still think he's decent as a dynasty stash. Even there, I wouldn't say excited, but somebody to keep around at the bottom of your roster if you're looking at dynasty.
Yep.
Denver Broncos next up here. And of course, the first issue when you're looking at Denver is Russell Wilson. He had those signs of decline in 2021. It was easy at the time to excuse those because of the finger injury. Now he's got last year on his resume, and there's no excuse for that. You can say what you want about Nathaniel Hackett, but a bad coach doesn't turn an awesome quarterback into a heap of garbage. And that's what we got from Russell Wilson last year. So first question for Denver, can Russell Wilson rebound? We can all have our takes. We'll ultimately see about that. What does Sean Payton's arrival mean? Again, it can only be a positive, I got to think, after what happened last year. How much of a positive, we'll see. So I think, Jared, when you consider all of the questions at play here, my starting point for Broncos pass catchers is just don't get too high on anyone.
Yeah, I'm not very optimistic about Russell Wilson bouncing back. Hackett was a disaster last year. I thought Wilson was part of the problem too. He actually set a career low in PFF passing grade, ranked 24th among 31 qualifiers. So that's definitely the concern here. I also think that Peyton's going to want to go run heavier. I think the Samaje Perine addition kind of points in that direction. So I'm pretty tepid about this Broncos passing game in general. So I'm not like super aggressive at any of these wide receivers or the tight end at this point.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, how should we sort them? And ADP is really doing that pretty clearly so far. Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver 22, late in round 4. He's just behind Mike Williams and DeAndre Hopkins. He's just ahead of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Drake London, and Terry McLaurin. To me, that's an appropriate range. I don't necessarily like him ahead of the guys that are behind him. He is somebody that I don't want to not get any of. So I'm mixing him in there. I'm not considering him a must get. And then next is Cortland Sutton at wide receiver 47, early round 9. To me, Jared, he's appropriately valued now. Like, I guess you could say I'm getting some of Cortland Sutton there. For me, it's not that, but it's like, man, I'm fine with Cortland Sutton there.
Yeah, we're actually lower on both guys in our PPR rankings. We have Jeudy wide receiver 28, Cortland Sutton wide receiver 48. So we're kind of we're closer on Sutton. Jeudy was definitely better last year. If you look at their 10 healthy games together, Jeudy did out target Cortland Sutton 75-71. Jeudy finished with more catches, yards, and touchdowns than Sutton. Jeudy also beat Sutton in some of the advanced metrics we look at: yards per target, yards per route run, PFF receiving grade. Jeudy beat Sutton in all those. So he's definitely, I think, the better fantasy bet. But I don't love him at wide receiver 22 just because, it is a pretty crowded wide receiver situation. Greg Dulcich coming off a solid rookie season, and we have major questions about the quarterback.
Yeah. And then behind them, we have Marvin Mims, wide receiver 73 on Underdog. That's late round 14. And then Tim Patrick at wide receiver 87, early in round 18. Those are 18 round drafts. So that means that he's not always going. He's also going right at the end of drafters drafts at this point. So everybody, I'm not saying Marvin Mims is overrated, but drafters overall are saying I'm definitely taking Marvin Mims well ahead of Tim Patrick, which I think is a little bit too certain at this point, given that Tim Patrick has been decent, did get an extension from the team. He's coming off the ACL tear, so I'm not saying he's somebody that you need to get, but I don't know, maybe he and Marvin Mims should be a little bit closer. Of course, it's a new coach, so who knows? They might not think anything of Tim Patrick.
Yeah, I'm one of those drafters that's maybe pushing Marvin Mims ADP up a little bit. I've actually been taking quite a bit of him late, because I think, like you alluded to, again, we've said that Marvin Mims, Sean Payton's first draft pick as the Broncos head coach, the team did trade up to get him late in round 2. Definitely seems like he was a target for them. Tim Patrick has no ties to this coaching staff. His ACL was last August, so he should be back to 100% by the time the season starts. So that's definitely going to be a wide receiver 3 battle worth keeping an eye on, especially with, we should mention with Courtland Sutton, there have been, talks of, him being a potential trade candidate. We'll see if that comes to fruition, but I do think there's a chance that happens. Then obviously Mims and Patrick would become a lot more interesting, but Mims is the guy for me, especially in basketball. He just has that, I think, big play profile that we kind of look for late in basketball drafts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's a better upside candidate than Tim Patrick. I think the best thing working for Tim Patrick is that he's now going at the end of drafts. So whatever you get from him is a win. Greg Dulcich, the name has been brought up a couple times along the way. I'm a fan. 13th among tight ends in target share last year, and that was despite missing the first 5 games with an injury that got in his way in summer as well. Missed the final 2 games. Also finished 8th among all tight ends with any targets in average target depth. He was behind only Darren Waller and Kyle Pitts among tight ends that had more than 10 targets. So we had a guy come in as an attractive prospect, and then he earned target share and he worked downfield compared with other tight ends. I think when you put all that with Greg Dulcich only going 15th among tight ends in ADP right now, I think he's at least somebody that you should want to mix in.
Yeah, tight end 14 in our PPR rankings. I'm definitely in on getting some Greg Dulcich as long as he's in tight end 15 range. It was an encouraging rookie season to draw the type of target share he did as a rookie. He finished 17th among tight ends in PPR points per game. That's solid for a rookie tight end. I don't know what Sean Payton thinks about Greg Dulcich. Someone asked Payton about Dulcich back in March, and Payton said, "quote, we'll see. Some of it was hard. The evaluation. Some of it was hard." I don't know what that means. It doesn't sound positive to me, though, that like Payton's convinced this is his guy. They did swing that trade for Adam Troutman during the draft, or spent time with Payton in New Orleans. I don't think Adam Troutman's very good. I think Dulcich is definitely better, but ultimately it depends on who Sean Payton is going to put on the field. That's what's most important. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on that as we start to get some practices and get into training camp for Denver.
I think it's a good time to get Greg Dulcich in Dynasty, especially if you're in a tight end premium, because, we'll see where it goes. I don't think that he's going to stay under the Sean Payton "it's hard" rock for too long, but, like you said, we'll watch that and see where it goes. Right now, just to give a little bit more context, he's in between Cole Kmet and Tyler Higbee in underdog ADP. So I think you have to like Greg Dulcich's upside versus those two guys.
For sure.
What about you? Are you excited about any of these Denver pass catchers? Maybe you're just betting on a Russell Wilson bounce back and you think he's a little bit undervalued, or maybe you don't care about the Broncos at all. You have a hot take about the Ravens. Let us know in the YouTube comments right down here. We'd love to hear it, whatever it is, your hot take on any of the teams or anything else. Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be our next team. And Jared, the first thing I know about this passing game is that I am not comfy paying wide receiver 17 prices for Calvin Ridley. That's late in round 3 on underdog. That's a pass for me.
Yeah, me too. It's not weighing the downside enough for me. Now, I do think Ridley has the best chance in this group to emerge as a true alpha receiver in Jacksonville because we've seen him do it, right? Last 2 seasons, we saw Calvin Ridley 24.7 and 25.9% target shares. Just by comparison, Christian Kirk has never topped a 23% target share. Zay Jones has never topped a 21% target share. Ridley's the only one among these 3 that's proven he can be a true, number 1 wide receiver in the NFL. So I do think he has the highest ceiling among these 3. The guy didn't play football last year. He only played 5 games in 2021. He missed most of that season with injury. He's going to turn 29 in December, so it's not worrisome level yet. But he's not young anymore, especially coming off that long layoff. It's a concern. So Ridley's just too risky for me to take him at a wide receiver 17 type price tag.
Yeah, and I think even if he's the target leader here, it looks to me like a situation where week to week, we're not going to be sure where the targets are going. We've got Christian Kirk, we've got Zay Jones, we've got Evan Engram. All three of those guys were with the team last year. I just think it's going to be spread around a little bit more. And, I think when you throw that in, I'm not sure Calvin Ridley has the ultimate ceiling to counteract that week to week stuff. So I agree. He's probably the best bet to lead in fantasy points here, but I think he's being drafted close to what his realistic ceiling is this year. I don't think he has upside into the top 12. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I've got him.
Yeah. And so Zay Jones is actually my favorite among these three at cost. I think he's going too late. I mean, obviously tougher target competition this year, but Marvin Jones is gone. He leaves behind 81 targets. So Ridley soaks up that a little more. Zay Jones only saw 12 fewer targets than Christian Kirk last year, and he played one fewer game. It was a 21% target share for Zay Jones, a 22% target share for Christian Kirk. I think Kirk's the better player. I think Kirk's going to score more fantasy points this season, but I think the gap between them and ADP is too big. So I've actually been taking a lot of Zay Jones, especially on my Trevor Lawrence teams.
I agree with that. And, looking at that underdog ADP, it's wide receiver 27 for Christian Kirk, which I think is fair. Early round 5. He was wide receiver 20 in half PPR points per game last year in his first Jacksonville season, just wide receiver 23 in target share, though. So, that could certainly come down with Calvin Ridley in the mix. We should probably bet on that coming down a little bit. So I think it's a fair spot for Christian Kirk, but wide receiver 57 for Zay Jones. I mean, he finished 32nd in half PPR points per game last year. He's now the 4th Jaguars pass catcher in ADP, and he's even the 2nd Zay in ADP, trailing Zay Flowers. So I think a little bit underrated there. And you mentioned Trevor Lawrence, which I think is key because best ball teams are going to be the most attractive spots to draft these guys because of that, target distribution that's likely to be inconsistent week to week. Trevor Lawrence, QB8, I think he's got the upside to be a top 4 fantasy quarterback by the end of the year. Certainly the upside to be, to hit that QB1 spot in any given week along the way. So looking at him as a quarterback that I don't mind targeting at all, I think that makes it more attractive to take either Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Engram at their prices, probably Zay Jones, Evan Engram more so than Kirk, and definitely all more than Calvin Ridley, like I said.
Yep, I'm with you there. I have a lot of Trevor Lawrence, year 2 in Doug Peterson's system, just year 3 for Trevor Lawrence. Improved pass catching core, gives us some rushing upside. So I like Lawrence a lot. And I do think Evan Engram is still a fine value, nowhere near as strong of a value as he was last year. But Engram coming off a tight end 5 finish in PPR points. He was 5th among tight ends in targets, a 16.5% target share. That probably comes down a little bit with Calvin Ridley in town, but it can come down, a percentage point or 2, and I think he can still pay off his ADP right now.
Yeah, now he did rank just 14th among tight ends in target share, according to the rankings on our site, which accounts for time missed. So it only counts the games that these guys played. I think that he's appropriately valued at that tight end 8 ADP. As you said, 24.3% of his regular season points last year came in that week 14 game against Tennessee. So that's one concern for me, in that his final fantasy point total is skewed a little bit by that huge game. Did love him last year in fantasy drafts. He was going absurdly late. Like I said, he's appropriate now. So he's not a target for me. He's also not somebody I'm fading.
Yeah, that's fair. We actually have him 10th in our PPR ranking, so a little below ADP, but all those guys are kind of close in that range. And again, if you have a Trevor Lawrence team or whatever, I do think Evan Engram is he's fairly priced.
Yeah, the difference between 10 and 8 at tight end is not somebody that I'm either avoiding or going hard after. Yep. Kansas City Chiefs next here. Last season, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman tied for 33rd in points per game, PPR points per game among all wideouts. Mecole Hardman finished 33rd in half PPR points per game. Juju finished 38th. Those were the best performances we've gotten from any Chiefs receiver not named Tyreek Hill since Patrick Mahomes arrived. So, Jared, as we flip to this year and look at where everybody's being valued, I don't think that anybody's dramatically overpriced at ADP before we talk about those numbers. I do think, though, that people generally overrate the available ceiling here in their perception of who is a strong target or not at wide receiver among Chiefs.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it is kind of like the Bills, right? And in this case, it's Travis Kelce versus Stephon Diggs that kind of soaks up a lot of Mahomes' production. It's still a good spot. So I looked at the Chiefs wide receivers rankings in total PPR points since Mahomes took over. 2018, they were eighth. The Chiefs scored the eighth most wide receiver PPR points. 2019, 12th. 2020, eighth. 2021, 10th. Last year, they slipped to 15th without Tyreek Hill. So, still above average. So there are still fantasy points to be had here. It's just, in recent seasons outside of Tyreek Hill, we haven't seen any one player kind of, stand up and take most of them.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I think is going to continue here. I don't see any reason to believe that one of these players among Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, whoever else you feel like throwing in. I don't have a reason to believe one of those guys is going to step up and be the leader. I think it's going to be like last year where stuff gets spread around.
Yeah, but I think if one guy does it, it's going to be Kadarius Toney. Just what we've seen him do, and I get it's been a tiny sample size. He's been in the NFL 2 seasons now. He's had basically 8 healthy games. But he's drawn a 20% target share in those 8 healthy games. If he can draw a 20% target share in Kansas City this season, he's going to be a serious fantasy factor. He's also averaged 2.12 yards per route run for his career. Just to put that in perspective, only 12 wide receivers with 50 plus targets topped that mark this season. And the Chiefs really like this guy. According to Adam Teicher of ESPN, the Chiefs wanted Toney to fall to them in round 1 of the 2021 draft. It sounds like they were prepared to take him if he did. They tried to trade for him last spring. They did trade for him in the middle of last season. So again, if someone's going to emerge as the top wide receiver in Kansas City, the clear top wide receiver, I do think it's going to be Kadarius Toney. And he is a guy I'm willing to take shots on at his wide receiver 3 price tag.
I will definitely agree that he is a talented guy, which is, of course, why he was a round 1 pick, especially after not playing a whole lot of wide receiver in college. I think the target share and the yards per route numbers are skewed a little bit. The 20% target share for me, for a guy that the Giants drafted in round 1 and to a team that was bad at wide receiver, that's not a great number. It's an okay number. The yards per route, again, he joined this team that was bad at wideout as a first round pick. They want him to get the ball. They gave him the ball when he was on the field. So that's going to skew that yards per route number a little higher. Similar for the Chiefs last year, when he was on the field, they were throwing the ball his way. He was not on the field a whole lot. That included in the playoffs where Sky Moore ran twice as many routes as Kadarius Toney did. Justin Watson ran more routes than Kadarius Toney did. So, I know that he had just joined the team mid-season, but so far we've got a guy who was so disappointing in his first stop that they traded a first-round pick away for a third-rounder. And then we got a guy who, got on the field marginally for the team that traded that draft pick to get him. So I think it's a fair spot. I think I'm fine with taking some shots at Kadarius Toney where he's going, wide receiver 35 on underdog, but he's right ahead of George Pickens. To me, those two are pretty similar in terms of, floor versus ceiling. If you want to take shots on both, go ahead. I think both of them are overrated for what their real ceiling potential is. He's going ahead of Treylon Burks, who I'm definitely taking ahead of Kadarius Toney. Going ahead of Deontay Johnson, I'm Deontay Johnson ahead of Toney very easily. And going ahead of Gabe Davis, I'll take Gabe Davis with Josh Allen over Kadarius Toney with Mahomes.
I'm with you on Burks and Deontay Johnson over Kadarius Toney, and Tyler Lockett's only 4 picks ahead of Toney in underdog ADP. So and that's why I don't have a ton of Toney right now. Like I want to get pieces of the guy, and we'll see how these ADPs shake out. But I'm definitely with you on Burks and Deontay going behind Toney being better picks at this point. And if I can get Lockett over Toney, I'm definitely doing that.
Looking at the other Chiefs wide receivers, and I'm realizing now I didn't even look at Marquez Valdez-Scantling's ADP. That's how much I'm thinking of him at this point. But Sky Moore at wide receiver 56, middle around 11 in underdog drafts. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 59. That's later in the same round in terms of overall ADP. Rice, I'm staying back from at this point. Rookie wide receivers tend to come along a little slowly under Andy Reid. It's not the easiest position to learn for him. Even if you look at Tyreek Hill's rookie year, he led Chiefs receivers in targets that season. He was still 34 targets behind Travis Kelce's team lead. He worked a much shorter range than he ultimately did over the next couple years with the Chiefs. He also ran the ball a lot. So they got Tyreek Hill involved a lot, but it was in a much different role than what he came to play. So even Tyreek Hill, is the extreme example, was a little bit limited in terms of his rookie year usage. Sky Moore, terrible rookie year, was a pretty good prospect, was a round 2 pick. So I think that there's some upside to the player. I'm not planting a flag for him, but if I'm comparing Sky Moore at wide receiver 56 to Kadarius Toney at wide receiver 35, it's Sky Moore for me.
Yeah, Sky Moore is still the my next guy in this Chiefs wide receiver core behind Kadarius Toney. He did struggle to get on the field as a rookie, which can be a bad sign. Sky Moore was fourth among KC wide receivers in snaps. He was fifth among them in pass routes. That's worrisome. He did earn targets at a decent clip. Sky Moore 1.182 targets per route run last year. That was actually just ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster, who was at 0.181, and it was way ahead of McCole Hardman and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So like when Sky Moore was on the field, he was getting targets. So he just needs to earn his way on the field a bit more. I think it's definitely possible in year two. Let's remember, this guy, Sky Moore, played quarterback and cornerback in high school, quarterback and cornerback, just a 3-year college player from a smaller school at Western Michigan. Like, to me, it wasn't a surprise that he wasn't able to carve out a huge role as a rookie. I definitely think a year two jump is possible, and I would definitely side with him over Rashee Rice at this point as a redraft pick.
And like you said, did well on targets per route. He, Toney, and Kelsey all finished ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster. Mm-hmm. Toney was ahead of Sky Moore. Again, Moore was on the field for more routes than Toney. It's not apples to apples because they were on the team for different amounts of time, but we're also talking about a rookie. So it's all stuff where you can point to small samples and say, there might be something there. I think as long as you're not too set, I'm not planting a flag for any of these guys. If we're taking shots on them at appropriate prices, that's where I'm comfy. And then, obviously we're talking some Travis Kelce, but there's not much to say. The guy is the king. He belongs in round one. You don't have to take him there if you don't want to, but he belongs there.
I don't even know what I was doing recently, but I was just looking at total tight end points last season. Travis Kelce scored 103 more PPR points than the second best fantasy tight end last year. 103 more points than any other tight end. Only 4 wide receivers scored more PPR points than Travis Kelce. So, I mean, he should be a top 6 pick in most fantasy drafts to me.
And that was at age 33, and everybody was like, well, Tyreek Hill's gone. Defenses are going to be all over him. He was like, so?
Yeah.
It's kind of silly. Yep. So whether you are chasing Kadarius Toney, whether you are a little bit more apprehensive like I am, you can set up your Draft Sharks draft war room right now to see exactly how he and all these other Chiefs pass catchers are valued in your league. We were just talking about Travis Kelce. He's our number one tight end. He's everybody's number one tight end, but you can find out exactly how to value him versus the running backs, versus the wide receivers in your draft, versus the quarterbacks. If you're in a super flex format, that's where this draft war room really helps to value things. Underdog just launched its second Poodle tournament, $7 entries, 20 entry max. So that's a lot less than those big tournaments where people can enter 150 teams. Maybe it gives a better shot to you if you're not a max drafter in these best ball tournaments. You can sync your draft war room to Underdog. You can get our values applied to that scoring system, helping you throughout the draft. And you can use our promo code Draft Sharks to get a full deposit match up to $100. So if you go into Underdog for the first time, if you haven't played before, you deposit $100. You'll get $100 for free with promo code Draft Sharks. That's 14 free poodles. You've almost max entered that tournament for free. Or you wait for a puppy to come out. That's the $5 tournament. You get 20 free ones there if you want to. Either way, it's free money to play with. Promo code Draft Sharks if you go on Underdog, and then you sync Underdog to the Draft Sharks draft war room. It does the setup for you. You don't really have to worry about it. So it's easy. It's fun.
Hold on. And there's the draft war room sidebar, which is freaking awesome. It's an extension where if you're drafting on Underdog on your computer, you'll have the draft war room little sidebar right on your right-hand side with the top 5 players available. Again, based on the league scoring system, based on ADP, based on your team needs. It's all right there. So you don't need to be flipping back and forth between screens. That's definitely helpful if you're doing a fast draft where I think it's 30-second clock on Underdog. It's very helpful not to be flipping back and forth between screens.
Absolutely. Not all the functionality of that draft war room, but like you said, right there, it's right in your war room. As things get close, sometimes you're like, oh crap, who do I pick? You can see who we'd recommend right there on the side of your Underdog draft room. New York Jets to close things out. And it's understandable, Jared, to me that this team was mid-pack last year in neutral pass rate. Maybe they even should have been lower than that. And, just in case anybody who's watching or listening is not familiar with what neutral pass rate means, that's measuring the rate at which a team passed in neutral game situations. So, it's trying to filter out when a team is way ahead or way behind, because if you're trailing, you're obviously going to be passing more. If you're way ahead, you're more likely to run the ball. So for neutral situations, the Jets were mid-pack last year. The Packers, back when Nathaniel Hackett was still there as the OC and Aaron Rodgers, of course, as the quarterback, they finished 11th and 10th in that category in the last 2 years with both of those guys on the team. I think when you put that stuff together, this should at least be an okay situation for overall passing volume. Maybe a good one, depending on what they decide to do with these Jets. But I think we should probably set the bar at this should be okay for passing volume. So where do you go from there?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That was my first note here too, that the Jets were neutral and were, league average and neutral pass rate, and sixth in just raw pass attempts last year with, Zach Wilson and Mike White at quarterback. Now they get Aaron Rodgers
and Joe Flacco.
Joe Flacco. This team should, probably jump, up into the top 10 in pass volume and probably most of these major passing stats. So obviously a big upgrade for all these pass catchers. I think the first guy to talk about here is obviously Garrett Wilson, who, despite that poor quarterback play, had a really strong rookie season. 23.4% target share for Garrett Wilson last year. To do that as a rookie is super impressive. He averaged 1.85 yards per route run, which is a very strong number. It's even more impressive when you compare it to the rest of the Jets wide receivers, who averaged just 1.10 yards per route run. So Wilson, we don't need to tell you guys this. He was awesome as a rookie. He should take a step forward in year 2 and gets a quarterback upgrade. So, he, I think, is pretty appropriately priced. And he's not coming cheap in drafts. You're going to have to spend a second round pick to get him, which feels about right.
Yeah, so I think that's the question on him. He's wide receiver 9 in underdog ADP right now. He's just inside of round 2. It looks like pretty much wherever you draft, assuming it's not a super flex draft, you're going to have to take him before the middle of round 2. So Are you comfy taking Garrett Wilson in that range? Because I haven't landed on him very much.
I mean, that's a bit higher than we have him ranked, right? He's wide receiver 11 in our PPR rankings. I definitely don't think he's like a screaming value there. He's also a guy I don't want to not have any of because, again, awesome prospect, first round pick, awesome rookie season. Now gets the quarterback upgrade. It wouldn't be surprising if he, finishes higher than where we have him ranked right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. Every time that I don't talk myself into drafting him, I'm thinking maybe I should be getting more Garrett Wilson. I certainly don't think, in terms of what I would say to other people about how to value him, I can't make a strong argument that he is, behind guys like Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins.
Yeah, I think to me, the biggest question on Wilson is his target share. Where does it go from last year's mark? How does Rodgers disperse these targets? Because we'll get into it here. Rodgers comes into Green Bay, brings along Allen Lazard with him, brings along Randall Cobb with him. Those guys shouldn't impact Wilson's target share, and I really don't think they will. But I guess that's the kind of only risk on Wilson if you're drafting him as the 9th receiver off the board.
Yeah, and of course it's splitting hairs a bit, but it is up in the splitting hairs range of fantasy drafts. So ADP is not saying that you should worry too much about Allen Lazard right now. So I'm closer to telling myself that I'm wrong for not drafting more Garrett Wilson than I am to saying you should not be drafting Garrett Wilson where he's going. Allen Lazard, ADP wise, wide receiver 52 on underdog, early in round 10, just behind Odell Beckham, just ahead of Tyler Boyd and Jacoby Myers. I think overall it's definitely a fair range, and there's a chance that he's underrated at that level. I think
it feels kind of gross, but I think Lazard is a pretty strong value in drafts right now. Again, he has the history with Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, the Jets gave him a 4-year, $44 million deal with 22 million of that guaranteed. Just by comparison, because they also added McCole Hardman, he got a 1-year, $4.5 million deal with $4 million guaranteed. So the contracts say the Jets view Allen Lazard as probably their clear number 2 wide receiver. Again, he does have the rapport with Aaron Rodgers. And last year, Lazard did set career highs with 100 targets, 60 catches, 788 yards. All those were career highs. And that was despite him missing 2 games. He saw a 20% target share in his 15 games. If he can even come close to that mark, say 18% target share, he's going to beat that wide receiver 52 ADP.
And it's more guaranteed money than Juju Smith-Schuster got on the market. It's more than Jacoby Myers got. You know, you can say, yeah, because Aaron Rodgers told him they had to. I'm sure that there was some communication on that. I would like to believe that even the Jets have enough of a backbone that if they didn't really like Allen Lazard, they'd be like, nah, that's cool. We're going to take one of these other guys that we like better. We're not going to spend that much money on Allen Lazard. So I agree. We should read something into this money. I think he is a value where he's going. I don't love Allen Lazard, the player, but if Aaron Rodgers does, that matters a whole lot more than how I feel about him. Behind those guys, I'm not sure there's a whole lot more worth talking about. Mecole Hardman, a wide receiver, 83, early round 17 on underdog is fine. I don't think he's a target player, but you know, he gets, I guess, more attractive in that playoff week format where all you need is one big outing to make your season.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised he's going that late, just because it seems like Hardman has had some fans. He did have, fans in Kansas City. Now he, gets another solid quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. So I actually think he's fine at that price tag. I'm not super excited about him. I think it's too late to expect a breakout from Mecole Hardman, right? He spent 4 seasons in Kansas City, never reached 41 receiving yards per game, never topped a 12% target share. Like, I just think he is what he is at this point. But at wide receiver 83, he's a guy, I think he's probably this team's number 3 wide receiver, and he does have big playability. So, in best ball especially, I think, he's worth a shot if he's your, 8th wide receiver.
And to me, he's the kind of guy that you only take in best ball. I don't think there's any point in taking him at any point on a redraft roster. If you're in some super deep league, then maybe, but when you're in those late rounds of a lineup setting league, the guys that you want to take at the end are players who at some point could turn into somebody that get you regular targets. And that's not Mecole Hardman. We could have Garrett Wilson and Allen Lazard both get hurt here. I'm still not going to bet that Mecole Hardman's getting 8+ targets a game.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Of course, as we said, the Jets also added Randall Cobb. Corey Davis is still on this roster, and is he sticking around? Because when I did our Jets projections, it was kind of assuming Corey Davis was going to be gone, because that was kind of what it sounded like a month ago. But he's still on the team as of now. The front office made some comment pretty recently that they plan on keeping Corey Davis around. So that's kind of the sticking point of this whole situation, because Davis is a guy who, former first round pick. He's been a full-time player throughout his career. I don't know what the Jets' plans for him are, and kind of who that would impact on this wide receiver depth chart behind Garrett Wilson.
I think he's interesting as a very end of draft pick. He's wide receiver 95 in underdog, which makes him often undrafted in those 18-round drafts. He only finished 77th in half PPR points per game last year, though. So it's quite possible he makes absolutely no impact, but there is the chance that he's their wide receiver 3. There is the chance that he gets either cut or traded and goes to a team that wants him a little bit more and has more opportunity left. I mean, he's still on a pretty big contract. He's getting more than $10 million a year. So I don't see why the Jets would keep him if they do like Mecole Hardman better than him, and if Randall Cobb is at least similar. But, I guess we'll see what happens. Certainly he's going in a range where it doesn't matter. If you feel like taking him, go for it. You're not hurting yourself. Sure. And then Tyler Conklin is the tight end. Tight end 25, it's kind of similar. First half of round 17, that's fine. You're not killing yourself with any pick there. But even at tight end 25, that puts Tyler Conklin ahead of Hayden Hurst, Noah Fant, Jelani Woods, and Hunter Henry. I'll take all those guys ahead of him.
Man, is tight end that deep this year? That's funny that those guys are all. I know. We say this every year, but at tight end 25 to be rattling off those names. Yeah, I guess that's why I don't have more Conklin, because I do prefer most of those guys over him. He did see 87 targets last year on a 14% target share. He was 8th among tight ends in targets, 8th in catches, 12th in receiving yards. The target competition is probably a bit tougher now. I mean, the Jets did lose Elijah Moore. They make these additions in Lazard, Hardman, and Cobb. So Conklin's volume probably sinks a bit. A quarterback upgrade, I don't know. I think he's one of those guys that's probably a good bet to finish a lot higher than tight end 25 if he stays healthy. Just kind of tough to get super excited about him. I don't think he's like a big time talent or anything.
Yeah, and I honestly don't buy the shot that he finishes a lot higher than tight end 25. He got boosts from the other quarterbacks being in, and obviously Aaron Rodgers is an upgrade over Joe Flacco or Mike White. Even those legends. But I just think if you look at everything at tight end, there's a lot more upside in those other guys that we talked about than Tyler Conklin.
Yeah, don't disagree.
Well, that's going to do it for this talk of the AFC pass catchers. If you like this show, if you like what we do in general, please subscribe, rate, review, whatever's appropriate for wherever you're taking in this podcast. We definitely appreciate that support. Wherever it comes, it helps us out. And of course, check the full rankings for wide receiver, for tight end, for running back, obviously all the other positions at draftsharks.com. Create your draft war room to see exactly how they fit into the scoring format wherever you're playing. And Jared, I think it's worth mentioning as we're talking about the rankings, like you and I have differing opinions on players here and there. But when people get to the rankings on our site, they're not going to get these differing opinions. They're going to get one clear view of how we project that guy and how he fits into their scoring format.
That's right. And if you don't like our projections, you can always make adjustments yourself on Draft Sharks that will be reflected automatically and instantly right on your draft forum. So you should probably listen to us, but if you think we're wrong, go ahead and change them.
We're not going to be right about everybody, so feel free to pick a couple of guys and move them around to make that team yours. It is your team ultimately. Jokes aside, it's your team, so make sure you like what you're putting together. For Jared Smola and the entire Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.